Undertale is a traditional role-playing game with just enough unique elements to warrant an interesting discussion, despite arguably being somewhat unpolished. The game follows a child's journey out of the underworld filled with monsters back to the surface and home. Along this journey, the protagonist encounters many characters from the eager and incompetent Papyrus to the terrifying Undyne. The game does a great job at making these characters feel real, and not just simply another boss that you need to defeat in order to progress the game. The game goes even further and allows you to develop these relationships with characters and respond to the monsters' feelings about yours and their own actions. And not just the main characters, but every encounter. Imagine Pokemon, but each time you encountered a Caterpie in the long grass, you had the chance to really reflect on whether you wanted to fight it. Ultimately, these actions shape the narrative and the ending of the game. Yes, the game does the do I kill or do I save moral choice thing that we have seen a little too often recently, but Undertale does it well. Instead of just being evil because it gives the best upgrades, or putting 9 points into good because you get +4 on healing, the moral choices develop in Undertale in a much more personal way. For example, during my first playthrough, I killed the mother caretaker character, Toriel. This was because I hadn't spent the time developing my relationship with her during the introductory part of the game, and when I asked to progress, she felt I wasn't ready. Not only did this enforce her character trait as the protector, but it created conflict organically. I wasn't being attacked, I wasn't being threatened. My eagerness to progress and inability to listen led to that outcome. Upon reflection, this felt like a real, in-the-moment emotional choice, much like a defiant child might have against a controlling mother. And, again like real life, the game continues to remind me of that choice with each following playthrough. Undertale isn't really a title for children, but I can see myself presenting it to my future son or daughter alongside such titles as the Mario and Luigi series or one of the original Zelda games to illustrate a few lessons. Firstly, to show how very similar mechanics can tell very different stories, but more importantly to teach the emotional lessons present here. The game approaches the more complex social relationships one develops throughout their life. How do you decline an invitation to join a friend's team because you know you just weigh the team down? When and how do you compromise your own values and position to ultimately better someone else's, who perhaps needs it more than you? When, if ever, is it appropriate to get violent? These and more are all choices that are demanded of the player almost continuously in Undertale. Honestly, it's extremely refreshing to see a game not just feature this, but focus on it. The game deliberately features extremely traditional role-playing mechanics, which is an interestingly subtle way to illuminate the shift in emotional tone from those sorts of games. When I encounter a computer-generated mob in Baldur's Gate, World of Warcraft, or Minecraft, the idea is to fight. And fight is an understatement for most players if we were going to be really honest. If we describe it what it is, it's normally to use an unfairly unequal amount of power to destroy these minions. normally in large numbers, loot the corpses for everything they're worth, and then move on never to think about them again. To not get all kills, or to have to flee in one of these situations, is generally considered a fail. And going into Undertale with that mindset is exactly what makes it so powerful. The battle screen, if you can call it that, consists of 4 options, and it's not a coincidence that that fight is first. After all, that's what we as players usually expect to do. And that's what made it all that more jarring when I found myself much more often going down through that menu and selecting Mercy. As well as this, it's a Mercy menu, not simply a flee option. Placed very closely to fleeing is sparing, to reinforce the feeling that this is not losing, but a viable, powerful choice. Very close to the end of the game, it is pointed out to the player that the level or the experience points accrued could also be considered as damage done or a monster body count stat. For me, this shows how the game has used these mechanics excellently to teach its emotional and moral lessons. When I started the game, I entered my name as Poopsie because that's the sort of thing I find funny, and I was extremely happy when the game met me with equally immature and silly humour. Most of the jokes were obvious and forecast, but the stupidity built up at times to create some genuinely laugh-out-loud moments, which is rare for me in any game. As enjoyable as these were, sometimes they were cut a little too close to the more powerful frames in the game. It's hard to feel the foreboding feeling of Asgore's castle off in the distance when literally 30 seconds earlier I was getting one of Sans whoopee cushion jokes. This isn't the game's only fault. The encounters start to feel slightly repetitive and the play is slow and clunky at times. Some of the puzzles and adjoining pathways feel long and unnecessary, only there to draw out the narrative in order to get that 8-hour game title. This clunkiness, along with the fluctuating tone and fourth wall breaks, makes me think the game designer, Toby Fox, intentionally constructed the game this way in order to give it a Brechtian feel. I genuinely enjoy artistic work constructed in this way, but for Undertale, I feel at times it detracted from the primary emotional lessons and narrative the game was attempting to tell. Despite all this, Undertale is still a game worth playing, and is moving the industry in a direction that really excites me. The game isn't about adventure or combat, but rather willing to tackle something that the games industry has always failed at. Dialogue is not simply a statement followed by 4 options. Relationships aren't a progress bar that you fill up over time. Relationships are a series of choices that are made over many scenes, and these choices are permanent. Games like Undertale are expanding the industry's capacity to transfer this experience meaningfully to the player. It's a small win, but it is a win.